The tragic mass shootings in El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio this past Saturday came less than a week after another mass shooting in California. The frequency of these shootings has reignited debate about gun control and how to stop these horrific events from happening. What could be the reasons and the motives behind such tragedies? I sat down with Dr. Lina Racicot, professor of psychology at American International College, for her perspective.
People are feeling that they don't fit into society, and unfortunately they're seeing that they're able to do things to hurt others, but these are not people who just have mental illness. These are people who are also sociopaths and don't have regard for human life, and that's very important to understand.
Okay, because I know that a big part of the political discussion, one part is guns, the other part is mental illness, and of course people would say, how many people out there have mental illness and wouldn't dream of doing what these shooters did? However, you know, they can't be well to be, you know, carrying something like this out.
Right. These are individuals who are externalizing their anger. They also have issues with healthy thinking patterns, which don't allow them to see the consequences for others. They're only interested in their own consequences and the need for empowerment in their lives. Because if we look back at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the most important psychological theories we have that's sometimes neglected, we're not hearing about it in the media. He told us many years ago that every human being has specific needs, starting from the basic needs of shelter and food, which then leads to safety and then belongingness and then self-esteem. Now, if something goes wrong in early childhood in any of those areas, some individuals will begin a negative thinking pattern, which could escalate if they're individuals with mental health issues that are beyond the normal mental health issues that we see that we can help through counseling and medications.
But if you look at the gunman from El Paso, you know, his family recently came out with a statement just horrified by what he did, that he grew up in a loving family. His grandparents came out with a statement as well. So you can't really look at him and say, you know, he had a really hard life. Like what drives you off this path?
Well, that's a really good question. But see, we don't know what happened to that person throughout life. And but we also don't know what his genetic or biological basis are for this type of behavior. Now, I'm not saying that it's in the family genetic, but it could be biological, some mutation of the gene. We know that we do see differences in brain development with serial killers. We need to learn more. We will be learning more. But what's really important is collectively as a society that we recognize the best thing we can do is to make sure we meet these specific needs that are in Maslow's hierarchy for individuals as they're growing and developing.
How do you do that? Because, you know, people will come back and say, look, there's a lot of suffering in the world. Right. There's a lot of people who have suffered a lot and wouldn't do this.
Right.
You know, are
That's
we
true.
kind of coddling, you know, these situations, or how do you handle this if you see something violent or somebody talking about violence in school? How do you handle it?
You always have to report it. Many of us think we have a way of thinking that someone wouldn't go there because we wouldn't. But we have to report it and let the authorities make the decision. Get it off of your shoulders and let someone who's trained decide whether or not it's a threat. And from there, we can eliminate some of the threats. Not all of them, because sometimes we don't have the triggers or the red flags. But I think intervention is our safest bet, that we're allowing children and adolescents to voice their concerns. We're not going to get to everyone, but at least we can begin to deter these types of behaviors.
Typically, are people who do something like this loners? They're not able to form, you know, healthy relationships with others?
Obviously, they don't form healthy relationships, but that doesn't mean they don't form relationships. Because when you have this need to belong, you will fulfill that need in one way or the other. I think that gangs are a great example of this. And some individuals who are loner types will find a few people that they can manipulate and have their healthy relationships with. Very few people stand alone. They have people around them.
Okay, the gunman from Dayton had a well-documented history of making threats when he was in high school, which was, of course, before the age of 18. If that is brought to the authorities, can a person change that thinking pattern, or is that it? I mean, is there help out there for somebody like that?
That's a very difficult question, and really it's on a one-to-one basis of every individual. We have to at least try. We do have resources to give people at least a chance to change. Then it's really up to them. Now, we cannot control every human behavior, if that's your question, but we can say to ourselves as a collective society, we want to, one, have interventions and preventions into place, and then the best responses when a crisis does happen.
Okay. Have we become more detached as a society? And I know that you've come in several times when we've talked about different things, social media, people don't interact anymore. Right. But have we detached ourselves? And, in these situations, are these gunmen just dehumanizing who's in front of them? Are they not understanding what they're doing? Or are they evil? Can people just be wired that way to be evil?
I think it could be any one of those things, but we have definitely dehumanized our emotions and desensitized ourselves to the world around us. And that's something we really need to work on. But I think that that person could be evil, and I think we have to stop looking at evil as a spiritual definition and start to look at what it actually means, that a person is wicked and without conscience. And that can happen in humanity.
Right, because I think a lot of times people will say that word, say, oh, that has religious connotations. But it has real meaning.
Real life meaning, absolutely.
In these circumstances.
Unfortunately.
Talk a little bit about young men in particular. I know that the suicide rates are high in older teens. Is there more despair in 2019 than there was in the year 2000 or 1995? I mean, are people just more desperate?
I think our lives have become more complicated, and that can lead to more despair and desperation, especially if you want to fit in and feel that you're a valued part of society. And again, if you don't find it in a positive way, you can find it in a negative way in our society, that's for certain. And I think that males are more likely to act outwardly rather than internally. It really depends on the person, however. Some people do internalize their fears and anxieties and their anger, while others externalize it. But when it escalates to the point of mass shootings, that's over and beyond the norm that we're talking about here.
And so for parents who, might be watching this and maybe their kids catch what's going on, and certainly teenagers, they know what's going on. A lot of people are upset. A lot of people are worried. I mean, it was contained. It used to be, it was schools, which is horrific that would happen there, but it seems like anything is fair game now as far as the frequency and occurrence of these shootings. How do you help families manage that fear?
I think open communication is the first thing, because especially if you have a child or an adolescent who's internalizing those fears, it's just not healthy. We have to have calm, rational conversations with our children and adolescents and just our family members. But I think we also have to realize that there's so many good people in this world as well, and we can't stop living. And that's the message we have to give.